Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. My name is William Harrison, but everyone calls me Billy. Life had always been predictable for me, in the best way possible. I built a solid life as a mechanical engineer, piecing together a world that felt safe, dependable, and perfectly aligned. I married Molly just after college. With her sparkling eyes, golden hair, and an energy that filled any room, she seemed like the perfect partner for my journey. We shared a cozy suburban home, two incredible kids, and memories that spanned a decade of laughter and milestones. But comfort, I learned, can be deceiving. Routine and trust had veiled the cracks in my reality, masking whispers that hinted at a truth I wasn't ready to confront. It started with the small, almost insignificant things. Molly would mention late meetings at her firm or offhand business trips that weren't in her usual calendar. She'd come home flush-cheeked and full of stories that felt half-formed. Yet, I let it slide. After all, Molly was my partner, my anchor in every storm. Questioning her was unthinkable. One evening, she came home with an excitement that felt strange. She wore it like a mask, a brightness in her eyes that didn't match the fatigue of the day. We were at the dinner table, the clinking of silverware filling the space between us and our children's chatter. When the kids ran off, I caught her staring at her phone, a small smile curling her lips. "Good news?" I asked, setting down my fork. Molly looked up, startled, before easing into a laugh. "Just a text from work," she said. But something in her voice sounded rehearsed. A week later, while making dinner, Molly's phone buzzed on the counter beside me. She was upstairs, helping Emma with her homework. The screen lit up with a message: "Can't wait for the weekend. I'll be thinking of you until then." My hands went cold. I stared at the words as if they were a foreign language, each letter sharper than the knife in my hand. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I glanced up, hearing Molly's soft laugh from above, a sound that once filled me with warmth but now made me want to scream. I placed the phone back on the counter as if it burned my fingers. That night, I replayed the moment in my mind, trying to justify, trying to believe in the innocence that had shielded me for so long. But doubt seeped in, and once it found a crack, it flooded in waves. The following days were a haze. Molly talked about an upcoming trip to Chicago, another work thing with her new client, Nick. The name made my jaw tighten. She described him as someone talented, good for the company, but I noticed the way her tone lifted when she said his name. I smiled and nodded as she spoke, my fingers gripping the arm of my chair. When she asked if I was okay, I nodded again, too numb to say anything that might crack open the truth. Days turned to weeks, and I became a stranger in my own home. Molly remained oblivious, lost in her excitement. The kids didn't notice, too preoccupied with school and friends. I lived a dual existence, one as the attentive father and supportive husband, the other as a man unraveling, piecing together a picture he didn't want to see. One Friday evening, she dressed for her trip. The dress was new, sleek, something she'd usually save for our rare date nights. She stood in front of the mirror, adding a touch of lipstick, eyes bright and lips curved in anticipation. "Chicago will be beautiful this time of year," she said, catching my eye in the reflection. "I wish you could come." "Me too," I lied. The words choked me, bitter and heavy. But I stayed composed, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. I followed her to the doorway as she gathered her bags. She paused, looking at me as if she sensed something beneath my calm. But before she could ask, I reached out, brushed her cheek with my thumb, and said, "Be safe, Molly." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she nodded, whispered a soft, "I will," and left. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there, hand still raised as the door clicked shut, the echo of her departure ringing in my ears. I glanced around the empty house, eyes catching the remnants of our life together, family photos, drawings by Emma and Jake pinned on the fridge, the throw pillows Molly picked out on one of our Sunday shopping trips. It was time. I wasn't going to play the fool any longer. I moved with precision, gathering documents, receipts, and phone bills I'd kept tucked away since that fateful message flashed on her phone. The evidence, painful as it was, laid out a clear trail. The last piece came when I logged into our shared bank account and traced an expense to an upscale hotel in Chicago, booked under Molly's name. But it wasn't for a solo room. My heart pounded, the betrayal no longer just an intangible fear but an undeniable fact. Anger burned in my chest, but I kept it at bay. Anger, I knew, would only cloud my path. I needed to be smart, patient, and, most importantly, ready. As the night deepened and the house settled into quiet, I sat in my chair, eyes on the clock, waiting for Molly to make her next move. The shadows lengthened around me, and with them, my resolve solidified. The next morning, I woke to the soft buzz of my phone, the dull ache of the night's revelations still gnawing at me. I blinked at the bright screen, squinting at the message. It was Molly. Landed safely. Meetings all day but might get a chance to explore the city later. Love you and the kids. The words were hollow, like echoes bouncing off empty walls. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the remnants of our life, mismatched mugs, the kids' half-finished homework, Molly's favorite vase filled with wilted flowers. After breakfast, Emma and Jake shuffled in, still groggy-eyed. Emma, with her tangled curls, mumbled a sleepy, "Morning, Dad," while Jake busied himself with pouring cereal, his attention fixed on his favorite dinosaur figurine that clattered along the table. Their innocence was a painful contrast to the storm in my chest. "Morning, kids," I managed, forcing a smile. Emma gave me a sideways look, noticing the shadow of worry that must have been etched on my face. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just thinking," I replied, ruffling her hair. It was the truth, in a way. I was thinking, but the thoughts were like jagged shards I couldn't piece together without bleeding. As they chattered about their day ahead, I sipped my coffee and steeled myself for what was to come. The plan was already taking shape. Each step, cold and calculated, played out in my mind with meticulous clarity. I would not confront her now. That would only end in drama, in denials, and shouting. I needed evidence, and I needed time. After dropping the kids at school, I drove to work, navigating the familiar streets that felt foreign now, as if they belonged to another life. The office buzzed with morning activity, phones ringing, colleagues exchanging greetings, but I slipped into my chair, head down, eyes glued to my screen. I sifted through the photos and messages I'd gathered, the details becoming more damning the longer I studied them. Molly's name was tied to reservations at a boutique hotel in Chicago not just this weekend but during past, business trips she had taken. The timeline stretched back months, aligning perfectly with her work commitments and her sudden bursts of excitement that she attributed to career milestones. A sharp knock on my cubicle jolted me from my trance. It was Pete, my coworker and closest friend. He leaned against the divider with an easy smile that faltered when he saw my expression. "You okay, Billy?" "You've been off lately," Pete said, concern softening his voice. I forced a grin, a rehearsed mask. "Yeah, just a rough morning. You know how it is." He nodded but didn't leave, his eyes narrowing. "If you need to talk, man, I'm here. No questions asked." "Thanks," I said, the gratitude in my voice genuine. I couldn't tell him, not yet, but it was good to know someone was on my side, even unknowingly. The hours crept by, and by late afternoon, I was restless. I needed more, a confirmation I couldn't ignore. I dialed a private investigator's number I'd saved, hands shaking as I spoke. His name was Mason, and his voice was gruff but professional. I explained what I needed, each word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I can start tonight, Mason said. But it'll take a few days to get anything substantial. That's fine, I replied. Just, be discreet. He chuckled dryly. Discretion is what you're paying for. The call ended, and the weight of what I'd just set into motion settled heavily on me. There was no turning back now. Molly's return would mean the start of an elaborate dance, one where every move I made had to be calculated, precise. That night, I tucked Emma and Jake into bed, their small arms wrapping around me with trust one vowed to protect. Emma yawned, eyes already closing. Dad, when's Mom coming home? In a couple of days, sweetie, I said, brushing her curls back. She'll be home soon. Okay, she mumbled, already drifting off. Jake was asleep, a slight snore escaping his lips. I stood there, the room dimly lit, and felt the sting of betrayal sharper than ever. This was what Molly was risking, the peace of our home, the innocence of our children, for what? The thought curdled my stomach. In the quiet of the living room, I waited. The house seemed to listen, the ticking clock amplifying the silence. A message from Molly chimed, interrupting the stillness. Long day. Heading to bed early. Miss you. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. The lies came so easily to her, woven into words that once held meaning. But not anymore. As the hours passed, I checked my phone compulsively, hoping for an update from Mason. Near midnight, it finally buzzed. A simple text, she's not alone. I'll send more details in the morning. I sat back, the message a punch to the gut even though I'd expected it. It confirmed what I had already known deep down but refused to believe. The room spun for a moment, memories of our years together tumbling through my mind like a cruel highlight reel, our wedding day, Molly's laughter as we danced, the first night in our home, bringing Emma and Jake home from the hospital. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until I saw stars. There would be no sleep tonight. Plans formed in the darkness, each one sharper, clearer. I would not yell or throw things or break. I would dismantle her lies piece by piece, and when she came back through that door, she would find a man changed, resolute and ready. I stood up, steadying myself with a breath. The night was long, but the dawn promised the beginning of something else entirely, retribution. Morning came with a dull, gray light filtering through the curtains. It felt like a betrayal, that the world could be so normal when everything inside me was cracking apart. The kids woke up oblivious, voices bright with sleep as they clattered into the kitchen. I greeted them with a smile that felt borrowed, my eyes strained from a night without rest. The day unfolded in its usual rhythm, school drop-offs, the drive to work, nods exchanged in the hallways. I played my part, but every minute felt like a countdown. At lunch, I retreated to my car, where I could be alone with my phone and the new messages from Mason. Photos attached. Observed at hotel dining area. Confirmed, another man, approximate age mid-30s, no other details yet. More updates by tonight. I scrolled through the images, hands trembling. The first showed Molly, her expression soft as she gazed across a candlelit table. The second captured a man sitting opposite her, his hand resting too casually on the table, just inches from hers. It was Nick. I remembered the name from her stories, the sparkle in her eyes when she mentioned him. My chest tightened, but I exhaled slowly, forcing the anger down. The anger would come later, when it was useful. I stared at the photos until the lines of their faces blurred, then closed my eyes. The betrayal felt deeper now, more vivid, yet a part of me was thankful for the proof. Doubt was a luxury I could no longer afford. That evening, I kept the dinner with Emma and Jake as cheerful as ever. Their laughter felt like the only thing tethering me to reason. As we played a board game after dinner, Emma giggled when Jake made up rules that made no sense, and for a moment, I allowed myself to smile, a real smile, brief as it was. When bedtime came, Emma hugged me tightly. "I can't wait for Mom to come back," she said, eyes bright. I swallowed hard, nodding. "She'll be here soon," I whispered. After they were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing down on me. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock seemed louder than ever. My phone buzzed, startling me. Another text from Mason: "Tonight she left the hotel with him." More to follow. I shut my eyes, my head tipping forward into my hands. Images raced through my mind, of Molly with that man, of whispered conversations and stolen touches. I stood up abruptly, the chair screeching back. Rage surged, pulsing hot and relentless, demanding an outlet. I clenched my fists until my knuckles ached, but then I breathed, the air shuddering as it left my lungs. I wouldn't break. Not now. Instead, I moved with purpose, gathering papers and setting them in a manila folder. Bank statements, receipts, copies of texts, and now, printed photos from Mason's report. I secured the folder in a lockbox at the back of the closet, hidden behind old sweaters Molly never wore. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was like storing her betrayal among forgotten relics of our life. The next day, as I dropped off the kids, my phone rang. Molly's name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I said, voice flat. "Hi, Billy. Just wanted to check in on you and the kids," she said, her voice honeyed, practiced. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, we're fine. How's Chicago?" I asked, keeping my tone light. There was a pause, so slight I might not have noticed if I weren't listening so intently. "Busy," she replied. "A lot of meetings, you know how it is." "Of course," I said, forcing a laugh. "Can't wait for you to come home." "Me too," she said, but it sounded almost like an echo, hollow and detached. As I hung up, I felt a rush of clarity. This call wasn't guilt, it was an act to reassure herself, to cover her tracks with practiced ease. The finality of what I needed to do settled into my bones. That evening, I met Pete at a small bar we used to frequent before life became a series of routines and obligations. The dim light, the low chatter, and the comforting smell of aged wood and bourbon felt like a haven. Pete looked up as I approached, eyes narrowing as he took in my expression. "Billy, what's going on? You look like you haven't slept in days," he said. I sipped my drink, letting the warmth loosen the words. "Molly's been cheating on me." The words felt foreign, as if someone else had spoken them. Pete stared, mouth slightly open before a grim set took over his features. "Jesus, Billy. Are you sure?" I nodded, pulling out my phone to show him the photos. He glanced at them, jaw tightening. "I'm sorry, man. I had no idea." "Nobody did," I said, eyes fixed on the amber liquid in my glass. "But now I do, and I'm going to make sure she knows I'm not the fool she thinks I am." Pete leaned back, the weight of what I'd said settling between us. "What are you planning to do?" I met his gaze, the resolve sharpening in me. "Take everything she's built her lies on and watch it crumble." When I got home that night, I passed by the kids' rooms, peeking in to see them sleeping soundly. Their peace was sacred, untouchable. But Molly's deception was now a calculated game, and I held the winning hand. The clock in the hallway struck midnight, its chime echoing through the stillness. I stood in the darkness, eyes fixed on the door Molly would walk through in a day's time. She would come back to the life she thought she still controlled, and that's when she'd see what control really looked like. The day Molly was due back, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I had played my role perfectly, masking the dread with smiles for the kids and a steady, calm voice on our morning routine. But beneath it all, a storm raged, ready to crash down when the front door opened. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room when I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. My heart thudded in my chest as I stood at the window, watching her step out. She wore a slight smile, her hair tousled by the wind, a figure so familiar it felt wrong to hate her. But hate was there, simmering just beneath my skin. The key turned in the lock, and the door swung open. "I'm home," Molly called out, her voice light and practiced, like the past few days were nothing but routine. Jake came barreling down the hallway, shouting "Mom," as he threw himself into her arms. Emma followed, more reserved but still smiling as she hugged her mother. Molly's eyes met mine over Emma's head, and for a moment, I saw something there, hesitation, maybe guilt. I forced myself to look back without flinching, the folder of evidence hidden under the couch where she'd never think to look. "I missed you guys," she said, her voice wavering as she kissed Emma's forehead. Then she stepped closer, leaning in to kiss my cheek, the gesture automatic. The scent of her perfume, a mix of jasmine and something sharper, filled my senses and triggered a wave of conflicting emotions. I turned away before I could react, gesturing to the kitchen. "Let's catch up," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. The kids, sensing adult talk, scampered off to their rooms, their laughter echoing in the hallway. Molly followed me, her smile fading as she sat at the table. I poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of her. The silence stretched, a heavy thing we both pretended not to notice. "How was Chicago?" I asked, the question hanging between us like a dare. She shifted, eyes flicking to the side before she answered. "It was fine. Just work, you know." I nodded slowly, my fingers tightening around my cup. "Just work," I repeated. The silence roared, filling the spaces with unspoken words. Her eyes darted to mine, wary now, the weight of suspicion settling between us. "Billy, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I placed my cup down and slid the folder across the table. "You tell me," I said, my voice low, almost trembling with restraint. Her eyes widened as she recognized what it was. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. "I don't know what you think," she started, but the lie fizzled out as she opened the folder and the photos slid into view. Each image, each receipt, each printed text message laid out the betrayal like a map. She looked up at me, eyes filled with shock, then something else, fear. "Billy, please," she whispered, tears gathering as she glanced down at the damning evidence. "It's not what you think." The words were so cliché they almost made me laugh. "It's exactly what I think, Molly. And worse, because you brought it into our home, into our lives. You gambled everything on him." A sob escaped her lips, the polished mask she wore shattering as she reached for my hand. I pulled back, standing so fast my chair scraped the floor. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Don't touch me." Molly crumpled forward, head in her hands. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed, and for a moment, I felt the urge to comfort her. But I pushed it away, hardening myself against the echo of who we once were. "Why?" I asked after a pause, the single word cracking in the silence. She looked up, her face a mask of guilt and grief. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything," she choked out. I thought I needed something else. Something different. But it was a mistake, Billy. The worst mistake I've ever made." A noise in the hallway made us both look up. Emma stood there, eyes wide, clutching the corner of the wall. She'd heard. I could see it in the way her face fell, the way her small frame seemed to shrink as realization washed over her. Molly's sob caught in her throat as she saw our daughter. "Emma, sweetheart," Molly started, standing up. But Emma turned and ran, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, and then came the sound of her door slamming shut. Molly's face crumpled, and she moved as if to follow, but I stepped in front of her, blocking the way. "Don't," I said again, this time softer, almost pleading. For the first time, I saw the weight of what we'd lost, what she'd thrown away, etched across her face. The house that once echoed with laughter felt like it was caving in on itself. The silence was no longer a pause, it was a void, a cold, unforgiving space filled with the broken pieces of our family. Molly sat back down, staring at her hands, now empty and shaking. The finality of it settled around us like ash. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the room in fading light. I stood there, the weight of her betrayal pressing down until I could hardly breathe. There was no going back. Only forward, into a life forever changed. The house was quiet, but it was not peaceful. It was the silence of a storm's aftermath, the kind that leaves everything still, broken, and unrecognizable. Emma's muffled sobs reached us from her room, and I knew, in that moment, that the damage went far beyond Molly and me. It seeped into the very walls of our home, into the hearts of our children. And for the first time, I felt the true loss, not just of a marriage but of a future that would never be whole again.